Mike Hannan, Vice President of Public Sector Services at NOVACES. Today we're here to talk about Agile emergency management. Some background first. On April 20th, 2010, our nation suffered the biggest oil spill disaster in Gulf Coast history. 11 people died, 17 were injured, and a massive containment and cleanup response ensued. NOVACES was asked to support that, the planning and execution of that cleanup effort. And here today to speak with us about that, Dave Bindewald and Rob Cheney. Hi, guys.
Hey, Mike.
So once the spill was contained and we were asked to provide some support, we spearheaded something kind of innovative and new in our planning and execution help. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Start from the beginning. Every emergency response is managed under the National Incident Management System. It's a very structured and very effective way of dealing with forest fires, natural disasters, oil spills, what have you. In the Deepwater Horizon incident, the incident command structure was set up precisely according to NIMS. When the spill first occurred in April until the well got capped in July, and for weeks afterwards, months afterwards, the incident command system continued to operate as if there were weeks, maybe months to finish. When incident command recognized that this wasn't a spill that could be completed, a response that could be completed in under years, they asked NOVACES to come in and help them formulate a new way of planning the response, still maintaining all of the ICS protocols. So
This is thousands of tasks.
Thousands of tasks.
Tens of thousands of people.
45,000 people were at the peak. 5 states. Over 1,500 miles of shoreline of various types. And in the ICS structure, command would get 1 week lookout of what would be occurring in that week. What they didn't have was a clear picture of what would be coming up next month and the month after that, and be able to look out past the normal planning cycle into the future of a response that they knew would last for years. And it has so far. So what we did was take lean project management controls and applied them with some paradigm shifts to the incident command structure. The paradigm shifts are what makes Agile emergency management agile. For a typical project, and for a typical project manager, you're not only looking forward on what would be a fixed scope of work, you're looking back to see how much you got accomplished. In a response, 2 things. One, there is no fixed scope of work. Every week in an emergency brings new effort and new problems. Also, there is no earned value in an emergency response. So looking back doesn't matter. That's already done.
Right.
So the agility of Agile emergency management is in the fact that it only looks forward. It can capture historically the information that we learned and what we have built or completed or done. But next week is the next adventure, if you will. And so Agile emergency management, always looking forward, using Project Management Institute principles, using Construction Industry Institute principles, and applying them to the emergency management protocol.
So we understand that planning a week at a time may be useful for many emergencies, but clearly this was not the case. This required a genuine long-term project planning effort that we've seen many in other industries perhaps. But there's still some key differences in this environment, some of which is the ever-changing scope, right? So with that problem in front of us, a lot of people would argue, why bother planning? Everything's going to change anyway, right? Well, we would insist that planning matters. So Rob, I'd like to ask you, how did we do this planning? How did we go about this? What was different? And what kind of results and added effectiveness did we give the effort?
Sure. Well, first we recognized the massive scale of this challenge that we had in front of us. So we focused all of our efforts initially on understanding where they were in the process of the cleanup at that point in time, getting a real good feel for what their methods of cleanup were, how they're deploying resources, getting an understanding of the constraints, because the constraints really in this particular program were many and vast. Constraints like environmental constraints, they often had to stop work in different areas because of bird nesting issues or turtle nesting issues. They had federal constraints of working on federal property versus some of the other properties that they worked on were amenity beaches that were owned by local municipalities. So there was a lot of constraints across the entire AOR. We had to really get a good feel for all of that information in order to build that long-range plan. So once we had that, we were then able to detail a good work breakdown structure. That's something that really didn't exist when we came in. And that detailed work breakdown structure led us into identifying the tasks that needed to be performed in order to get to what was deemed completion or understood as completion at the time. And then identifying the resources that needed to perform those tasks, giving those tasks some estimated durations, and then the logic that we move from one task to a successor task to get down to the final milestones.
So here we are more than 2 years later. How many tasks have been completed on that project?
That's a great question. It really is. And to be honest, I know it's well over 10,000. Current files that we have more than 10,000 tasks. So probably since inception, around 50,000.
So lots of agility on 10,000 tasks.
Yes.
It can be done.
Constant.
So, this was a one-time thing, right? It's the biggest Gulf Coast oil spill disaster. Hopefully we won't have too many more of these.
Right.
Is it a really one-shot deal, or are there others that can benefit from what we've done?
Clearly, what we have put together in Agile emergency management takes the ICS planning cycle and moves it into a whole new arena. Still following the protocols. Whether you are an owner, responsible party, whether you are a response agency or a response contractor. Agile emergency response improves your ability to control the response, not the emergency, but control the response, and give you a much clearer picture of where you are in that response at any given time. What Agile emergency management does is, number one, improve your planning accuracy, because it's done at the task level and it's activity driven rather than resource driven. Secondly, it's no longer a checklist, it's a dynamic plan. An ever-changing scope, but dynamic. And Rob can speak to some of the reductions in waste.
Absolutely. So because we were able to really dig in and understand all these tasks and what resources are required, we were able to help the logistics department, the procurement group, really understand what they're going to need to be procuring in the future. That way they weren't over procuring certain resources, and they could really manage that the mobilization and demobilization of resources much better. That led to a lot better, a lot less waste in the process.
So while it might be really difficult to estimate exact dollar value of the waste avoided by all this, give it your best shot.
Well, we
Is it
did
millions?
We did
Tens of
also,
millions?
It's tens of millions.
Tens of millions?
We did also cost load all of our resources, which ended up being used by the response to forecast their monthly expenditures far off into the future, so then they could budget, the responsible party could budget better. As part of that, we have a really good feel for how much cost we probably did save, and I definitely would say it's in the tens of millions.
So last question, Dave. We were brought in after the emergency happened on this one. Any suggestions for how we could come in and help prospective clients be more proactive?
Absolutely. By law, every agency, every response organization, every oil company, you name it, must do annual preparedness for an emergency. Typical way of doing that is develop a scenario and train to the scenario. So you'll have tabletop exercises that are done around an oil spill or a natural disaster, what have you. That's the time to start using Agile emergency management, because you can start capturing your planned response. And in the event of a real emergency, you already have a dynamic plan to go forward. And it's flexible enough, agile enough, that it will match the real emergency quickly. So from the first day when you're mobilizing on an emergency, you already have a dynamic plan that'll capture all of the elements of that at the task level.
So if I understand right, you're saying they're already doing tabletop drills by law. There's no additional time, effort, or money required to integrate an Agile emergency management approach into those drills. And then you have a live, dynamic, truly Agile response ready to plug the box should an emergency occur.
Correct.
Well, great. I think I got it. Thanks, guys. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Mike.